Welcome everyone to tonight's event, The Power of Prosecutors That Threatens Peace. Just want to let everybody know up front that we are being recorded. So now we are being recorded. Tonight's presentation is co-sponsored by GLUNA, the Greater Lansing United Nations Association, and One Love Global, Center for Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation. My name is Lisa Berg, and I'm the VP for Programming for GLUNA. We're so glad you joined us this evening. During tonight's event, we will first hear from our two speakers, whom I will introduce in a moment, and then we will reserve plenty of time for Q&A. If you have questions, please put them in the Zoom chat so that I can help provide them to the speakers when we get to the Q&A. You can put them in there during the presentation if you think of them, or when we get to the Q&A section of the program. Tassin, I'm going to have you go to the SDG slide. At GLUNA, we always like to highlight the UN Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, that our events are addressing. This evening's discussion will cover SDG 10, Reduced Inequalities, and 16, Peace, Justice, and Strong Institutions. I would now like to introduce our speakers for this evening. Full bios of our speakers can be found on our GLUNA website or on the One Love Global website, which is oneloveglobal.org. With us tonight, we have Angela Waters Austin and Sean Holland. Angela Waters Austin is founder, president, and CEO of One Love Global, a nonprofit corporation committed to peace, justice, and opportunity. She has over 25 years' experience in promoting racial equity, public and community relations, fund development, and more. She organized My Brothers and Sisters Keeper Michigan Network to support collective action among communities that accepted President Obama's My Brother's Keeper Community Challenge. She is founder, producer, and host of the Equity Equals radio show on Michigan Business Network, which promotes nonprofit leaders and social entrepreneurs. She has co-hosted and co-produced public affairs programming for Lansing's WLAJ TV 53 and developed educational and cultural special features for the Michigan Chronicle newspaper. Angela serves as co-chair of the Within Our Lifetime Network Communications Working Group. Our second speaker is Sean Holland. Sean L. Holland, with degrees from his home state of Florida, has served the world in various ways. In 2013, the International Canadian University appointed him as an ambassador and chaplain to the United Nations Economic and Social Council. He holds an honorary doctorate in philosophy and humane letters from CICA International University and Seminary. In 2003, he co-founded Vision, an MSU student organization which continues today to equip students with the social and emotional skills necessary to lead and thrive. He expanded the model to LCC, Western Michigan, and beyond. He continues to develop leaders as president of I Am Equipped to Excel and has mentored hundreds who are now serving globally. Sean is founder and senior pastor of the Epicenter of Worship Church in Lansing, Michigan, and is director of transformational leadership at One Love Global. Welcome to you both, Sean and Angela.
We want to say thank you for being here. It is an honor. We're grateful for being with everyone on tonight and for this very important conversation that we are going to engage in, the power of prosecution that threatens peace. And so let's see here. Just want to make sure that we're good here. Can everyone hear me? Okay. And so we're gonna, I just wanted to say welcome and thank you for having us. And then I wanted to just, I know Angela, she's here with me as well. And she's a part of, we work together. And so Angela, I know you wanted to say hello to everyone as well.
Hello, everyone as well.
Oh, that is so fun. It's good to see everyone's faces. We're going to jump right into the presentation. And I'm going to ask them to share the screen. And we're going to talk about the power of prosecution. And this, on this really pivotal day, it's important for us to have this conversation, and it flows well with One Love Global's mission. You know, our mission is to transform communities so that Black children experience justice, peace, healing, opportunity, and abundance. And our big vision is global, liberation, and reparations, where Black people experience radical love of self, community, and planet. And so we are glad to be One Love Global TRHT Center for Racial Healing. And so tonight we're going to talk about the power of prosecutors that threatens peace. And our agenda, next slide, and our agenda tonight is really simple. We're going to talk a little bit about the role of prosecutors. And we're going to share with you the Health Opportunity and Equity Initiative data. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions around that data. And then prosecutors' role in Roe versus Wade enforcement. And then what is our call to action as we move forward? And so when we look at the role of prosecutors, next slide, when we look at the role of prosecutors, they have been referred to, and we need everyone to know that they are elected officials, and they have been regarded as the administrators or the administrators of justice and the supervisors of public safety. And, they wield far-reaching discretionary power. And we really need to talk about this and understand the discretionary power of prosecutors. They have powers such as to determine charges to pursue, whether to recommend bail, which witnesses to interview, and what sentences to recommend. Prosecutors also control the plea bargaining process, by which an estimated 95% of criminal cases are resolved. With more than 2,300 prosecutor offices across the country, these gatekeepers of the criminal justice system affect the lives and outcomes of millions of individuals each year. And so when we look at the next slide, it's important for us to kind of really think about this fact that prosecutors around the country continue to enforce racist statutes, systems, and white supremacist societal norms. And so we are, the map that you're looking at on the screen is a map that has tried to indicate where do we see the presence of a different move, a reimagining of public safety through progressive prosecution. And so when we talk about progressive prosecutors, you can look at how scarce the map is on the screen. And we talk about, when we talk about defining progressive prosecution across the country, they've been referred to as reform-minded prosecutors, where they have set a different agenda or pursuing a different agenda, committed to both public safety and reducing mass incarceration. They have pursued a range of policies, including using diversion and treatment programs as alternatives to drug-related crimes, refusing to prosecute cases brought by officers with a history of dishonesty and unreliability, and reducing prosecutions of lower-level crimes. So when we look at this map and we see how scarce this map is as it relates to reform-minded prosecutions, again, we know the incarcerated population, the global incarcerated population that America occupies is just absolutely amazing. And so we have this punitive mentality. We make money on incarceration and it disrupts peace. And so these gatekeepers, these elected officials, oftentimes go unnoticed, and we need to think about this. And so on our next slide, we want to just highlight what critics say. So what do critics say? Critics have opposed reforms by claiming that the changes pursued by progressive prosecutors would pose a threat to public safety. And so we know that incarceration does not work. It does not reform. We understand that. And again, just think about it. There are over 500,000 African-American men right now incarcerated in America. And so we know that there are those who are incarcerated right now under marijuana charges, and now that marijuana is legal in many states, are they being released from prison? We understand that we have real major issues, but the prosecutor has the power to change the entire flavor. And so this is an elected position that we wanted to really talk about that threatens peace across this nation. when we look at the HOPE data, and let's bring it home. And so again, we're talking about the Health Opportunity and Equity Initiative. And there are 5 different domains and 27 different indicators that go into each one of these domains. So when we look at where Michigan lies in this very moment, we're coming up on November 8th, the election. The area that we decided to focus on was the area of community and safety factors, right? Especially for this presentation. Michigan ranks 43 in the area of community and safety factors. Inside of community and safety factors, one of the indicators is sexual assault, and we're going to talk about that. And so what would it look like for us to, what we would call, reach the HOPE goal? So 47% of Michigan adults are in very good or excellent health, which means we've got over half of our population that is experiencing a whole different reality. And so we have to work together to move 1.7 million Michiganders across the finish line, where they have access to healthcare, they have safe neighborhoods, they have clean water, and clean education and opportunities, economic opportunities. And so tonight we're going to narrow this data down. And when we look at it, again, Michigan ranks 43 out of 50 states in community and safety factors. The next slide, we see that the racial inequality, that Michigan is furthest from the distance to the goal. We've got a lot of work to do. But what's more telling is the demographics. When you look at the bottom of the graph, you see the blue, the yellow, the green, and the orange. When we look at the blue, the yellow, the green, and the orange, we see that African Americans, Hispanic, our indigenous population, as well as our multiracial, are furthest from the HOPE goal inside of Michigan and are experiencing the greatest inequality in health, in economic, in education. And so especially within the criminal legal injustice system, as we like to say. And so this is important when we begin to think about the power of prosecutors, and we look at this data as it relates to the inequalities and who is experiencing harm, whether it be economic, whether it be ecological. Think about the groups that are represented here. And so what we want to do is shift this now and pull up the next slide, where it looks at the prosecution and Roe versus Wade enforcement. So you think about the states that, when you look at this slide here, it really shows you the states that have pending ballot initiatives and those that have already banned. So like Texas, Michigan, where the arrow is, we have a ban pending, right? But what happens if that ban is not enforced? You now put that power to pursue legal action and to pursue incarceration of women and break up families in the hands of these elected officials, and which are the prosecutors across the state of Michigan. And so we wanted to really highlight this, that this is a real moment where if we don't get our arms around it and we don't begin to understand the power that prosecutors hold, it really threatens peace across this nation. And so I'm going to pass it over to my cohort here, Angela, for the next part of the presentation.
Thank you. Yes, Mordecai, so that is sobering. I want you to just take a minute and sit with the discomfort of the data that was just shared with us, the racial inequity, and what a threat to peace is really before us. When we've been looking at this HOPE data as a part of our truth, racial healing, and transformation work for about the past 6 months as a part of a national team that's really examining how we use this data to move our state closer to that goal, where 1.7 million people have been brought along to a place of good health. When I saw the data on sexual assault, next slide, please. Actually, two more. Yes, thank you. So as you can see, in Michigan, we're looking at, of all of the indicators, of all of the domains where the greatest impact is in the area of sexual assault. And we see that only 23% of folks in Michigan live in counties with low sexual assault rates. And so we try to say this in a very, affirmative way, that we want to get to the distance of goal. How do we actually make communities safer? And so looking at this data for months, and then Roe v. Wade being abolished after 50 years, really just systems began to collide. And it didn't take very long for two prosecutors in Michigan to release statements to the media that they could not wait to prosecute their first case in Michigan. And so think of the reality of folks in isolation during COVID, folks children who have been out of school. Think about who's most directly impacted. And what we learned from one of our beautiful comrades who does work with survivors on a daily basis is that the majority of folks who are experiencing sexual assault, it's not the random person on the street who follows you home. It's the person who you trusted, who you may have a familial relationship with, someone who is in your life and in your proximity because they have a degree of trust. So thinking about what it actually means for over 70% of Michigan's population to live in a community where there is a threat of sexual assault, not from a stranger, but from folks close to us. It really requires us to think differently about what it means to be a survivor, what it means to be a perpetrator, and also what it means to criminalize those kind of relationships in ways that can cause far more harm than if we actually had other systems of care and intervention and healing for both survivor and perpetrator. As Mordecai said so clearly, we know that the carceral system has not fixed the problem. The carceral system has not reduced sexual assault rates. It has not led to victims being healed. In fact, prosecution has actually caused harm to survivors in instances where self-defense has actually led to people being incarcerated for their own sexual assault. So we really do have to think about the power that prosecutors hold. And as Mordecai said, it's with great discretion, and it is also with a greater amount of immunity. So we talk about law enforcement having qualified immunity. Prosecutors have an even greater amount of immunity. It is rare. And I'm struggling to think of an instance where a prosecutor has actually been held accountable for the outcome of the decisions that they've made, even when the case has been overturned, even when there's been evidence that actually led to the release of someone who has been incarcerated for a number of years. So think about that degree of power and what that actually means in communities where you're targeted because of your race, because of your immigration status. Who do you reach out to? Who is protecting you? If the prosecutor's job by writ is to seek justice, on whose behalf is justice being sought? And do survivors actually have a say in what justice looks like, and in what healing looks like, and in how the people in their lives who have caused harm to them actually get to be a part of that healing if they choose? And if they choose to move into the justice system, into the law system, if that is what healing looks like for them, if that is what justice looks like for them, what are the assurances that we give to survivors that taking that step would actually take them out of harm's way? Because sexual assaults rarely prosecuted, rarely reported because they are rarely prosecuted. Survivors are rarely believed when they do. So when we look at this data, we know it is really low. As dismal as it is that only 23% of us live in a community, live in a county with a low sexual assault rate, we know that that is an underreport, primarily because it's relationships involved. So we can move to the next slide. I know that's a lot, so take another breath, take a sip of water, hydrate. This is tough stuff. And I really want to lift up, because you talked about the two goals. And I also want to lift up that this is about women and girls. Roe v. Wade affects anyone who can get pregnant, and sexual assault is not gender specific, but we know that women and girls, and trans women in particular, are far more likely to be targeted and victims of sexual assault, and far less likely to be believed, far less likely for their cases to actually lead to prosecution. Where does that leave survivors? And so when we look at Michigan and how it compares to other states, I mean, just even our neighboring states, we see that Michigan is far behind. What is it about Michigan that Illinois, Indiana, Ohio are far closer to the goal in reducing rates of sexual assault? Now, we don't know if that's what this data says. This data may say that there's just lower reporting. This data may say that fewer cases get prosecuted. So really understanding what's behind the data. And it is really important for us to understand that this is just based on self-reports. This is based on behavioral health studies, where children are concerned, where adults are concerned. So this is just self-reported, as well as uniform crime reports. So understanding what we see on the surface of the data, for me, is far less compelling than the story behind the data when we look at these comparisons. Where Michigan had the most in common was actually places like Tennessee and Utah and Colorado. And so that actually triggered something in my mind, is what is it about Michigan that we have more in common with states that are distant from us than we do with our Midwestern sister states? I don't have the answers, but maybe you will have some questions as a result of this data that we can talk about together. Next slide, please. All right. So yeah, so I don't know if you were having a Handmaid's Tales kind of moment in looking at sexual assault data and Roe v. Wade data and prosecution data, and just the criminalization of our bodies, and certain kinds of bodies in particular. What does it look like for us to create different kinds of solutions? Because that's what we're about. TRHT is about transformation. As Mordecai said, we're talking about reform-minded prosecutors. Where are the transformative prosecutors? When do we look at the ways that prosecutors and the law system can actually defend and protect the most vulnerable, the most directly impacted, those who, on the Statue of Liberty, we say are the very essence and the lifeblood of this country? So we have been imagining, along with folks all across the country, what it would look like to build different kinds of systems that care, systems that, in the instance that there is harm, because we're human, there will be harm. We have all caused harm in some way. And the sooner we reconcile that, the sooner we can let go of the idea that punishment is the answer. So the BREATHE Act is this vision that we're replacing systems of violence and harm. I'm sorry, you're going to have to pause between each one. Replacing systems of harm with systems that heal, that actually are caring. Imagine if you are a survivor. Who is that first conversation with? Who do you pick up the phone and call? How many survivors are re-traumatized in the process of the retelling? The look. That look when you're telling your story to someone who doesn't believe you. If you've never experienced that kind of erasure at a time of deep crisis, then you wouldn't really understand why new systems are so crucial. So our mission is to build revolutionary policy, revolutionary in that we have to reimagine systems in different ways. So that's the first step. Can we acknowledge that the systems that we currently have are not producing the desired results for everyone? How do we reimagine these harmful systems and actually invest where the resources are most needed? Okay, you can go ahead. And with those resources, how do we rebuild real public safety? How do we do the healing in our homes and in our communities that actually reduces the instances, that allows us to break the cycle? Because we know that sexual assault is a cycle. How do we actually heal ourselves and heal our communities in ways that survivors are building new systems that actually prevent harm from recurring again and again? That means we're going to have to reclaim our public systems. If our current system of law, if prosecutors aren't actually fighting for justice in ways that actually are meaningful to survivors, because we hear a lot that prosecutors have to be tough on crime because they're doing it on behalf of survivors. As a survivor, I'm telling you, no one has asked me that. And I'm telling you that as a survivor, what I want is a healed world. I want a just world where we, as a community, have built new systems across law, education, health, environment, because we're not single issue people and we don't live single issue lives. So to make the connection between law and prosecution and reproductive health and bodily autonomy is the beginning of really understanding what it means to sit at the intersections of systems. And finally, how do we get to a place of repairing the harm? What does that look like? It means that we have to listen differently. It means that the rebuilding of systems actually has to come from the stories of those who have been harmed, who get to name what justice looks like, who get to name what healing looks like. And we actually have to have a different vision of accountability, because accountability in many ears sounds like punishment. Accountability is an act of love. I care about you. I caused harm to you. I want to help you heal. And if it is possible for us to repair, to be reconciled, that would be awesome. That is not always possible. There are many survivors who never want to lay eyes on their perpetrator ever again. That is not true for everyone. And we have to build systems that can actually accommodate the range, the spectrum of harm and healing, and find new ways of justice so that communities become more whole as a result of even harm. So the Michigan BREATHE Act is our invitation to our community, to our state, to really rethink what it looks like to rebuild systems. And so we've been linking up with some amazing folks from across the state who are looking at this from an intersectional lens, who sit inside of organizations that do important work, like Monica Lewis-Patrick of We the People Detroit, who to me is an environmental and climate justice guru. And that's a part of racial inequity, because we know which systems, which communities are most directly impacted as we look at Dr. Karen Williams Weaver of Flint, and we know that a man-made water crisis poisoned thousands and thousands of people and led to deaths for which, in my mind, no one has been accountable. Dr. Pamela Pugh, who is one of our state's most vocal and passionate champions for children, to the point that she sided with Detroit students in a lawsuit that went to the Supreme Court demanding that children actually have a right to literacy and that our government has a duty to ensure that our children are educated. These are the kind of warriors that we actually need with us. And so we'll continue building and reaching out. And I'm so grateful that Tajmika Torak of the Firecracker Foundation has agreed to join us to be a champion and a co-sponsor for the Michigan Breathe Act, specifically to bring together survivors to really reimagine and rebuild systems in ways that protect some of our most directly impacted folks. So here's your chance to take action. We're going to have Q&A, but you can join us. You can co-sponsor this legislation. Like, you can be at the ground level of saying that we can build new systems, and you can be a part of that. Thank you. So are we can come back to the call to action. Okay.
Yes, I was going to say also that we are going to put that on the GLUNA website so that it is available to people there as well. And somebody did just put it in the chat, the link, so that will be helpful as well. Thank you
Lisa,
so much.
Lisa,
Yes.
I would also like to give a shout out to our to the Vera Institute of Justice. We've been working with them for a year, maybe about 2 years now, and they have been working with our Ingham County prosecutor. And so there's the final report from their research will come out here in the next week or so. And so this is a very important topic. And I want to thank Angela for joining me and being here with us. It's always a pleasure to be sharing the space with Angela Waters Austin, always. And thanks again for having us. So just wanted to give a shout out also to the Vera Institute of Justice.
Thank you. And if you send the information about that, we can put that on the site too. And thank you both so much for the a lot of insightful information and a lot to think about. I want to open it for questions, and anybody with questions, we can put them in the chat. I see we have one. Oh, we have a couple already. First one is, are there currently legislators who are supporting the Breathe Act?
I'll take this one. So just a little background, because I see there's multiple questions, so I'll try to kind of answer multiple questions. So the Breathe Act began as a federal omnibus dream of civil rights legislation for our time. It was written by the Movement for Black Lives, which is a collective of Black-led organizations who strategize together, who build capacity together, and who have common goals that we work towards. One of them is ending state-sanctioned violence, and specifically ending the war on Black people. So those, I think, are the ones that most align with the goals that we're discussing tonight. So what does it look like at the federal level, the state level, and at the local level, for there to be this Breathe Act, this Breathe inspired legislation? So the federal omnibus bill is almost 200 pages, just to give you some idea of the depth, the range across all of our systems. So thinking shorter term, what are the ways that we can reduce some immediate harm? What is legislation that needs to pass that has been lingering for decades, like HB 40? So the omnibus bill, it lifts up Breathe aligned legislation. What is the legislation that actually moves us closer towards abolition that reduces harm. So looking at the education system, looking at the criminal justice system, looking at juvenile justice, environmental justice, reproductive justice, electoral justice. So really thinking about in a very comprehensive way, you know, many of the small wins that we've been working on for decades. Many of you in this room have been working on this for decades. So how do we actually come together and write legislation that acknowledges the intersections, that moves us beyond reform and actually is transformative? So the Breathe Act contains the 4 sections that we just outlined. And then within each section, there are a number of parts. And so we do have a sponsor who I can't announce yet. I've promised not to steal their thunder. So they will be making the announcement, but yay, we succeeded. And I shouldn't say moving someone. We met someone who was already doing the work, who was already passionate, who was already speaking the language of the Breathe Act without using the language. And that is exactly the kind of legislative sponsor that we need. So at the federal level, there are sponsors, and one of them is actually from our state. So across the country, there are states who are looking at state level Breathe Acts. There are bills that have been kind of carved out of the Breathe Act, like the People's Response Act that you've probably heard of, is Breathe inspired legislation that specifically is focused on building a new system of care. What does it look like for there to be a different response to people in crisis? So our Michigan omnibus is looking very similarly. Where is legislation that has already been authored, introduced? Where can legislation that doesn't quite measure up to our Breathe standard, how can we reimagine? Where can we refine that? How do we bring in more co-sponsors so that we're introducing this big omnibus bill in pieces that actually move us closer towards the whole? So we have started that process with 12 pieces of legislation. And we know that this is long-term work, and it's going to take the community mobilizing, it's going to take community will, which is why we're starting with this process. We have to be able to see it and imagine it for our legislators to understand that this is actually on the ballot. We have to put it on the ballot, even though it is not a ballot measure. But we have to redefine the conversation about what we want and expect from our elected officials. And the Breathe Act becomes a new criteria for how we examine and how we communicate and how we frame what it is that we want in Michigan for ourselves and our families.
Thank you. So there are 12, you're saying there are 12 pieces of legislation that are currently in process, or where do they stand?
They are currently in the assignment process. So they're at the very beginning stages of being drafted and being vetted to ensure that they meet our Constitution. And we anticipate that, I don't know if it'll be introduced during lame duck, but we're preparing ourselves for next year and using this time and space right now to really build the momentum so that it's easy for legislators to say, yes, this is what the people want. We are the people, and we get to say. And we also get to ask folks if they have heard of the Breathe Act and what's their favorite part of it and which one they're going to sponsor.
Great. Thank you. And another question, not in the chat, but something I had a question about. So the HOPE initiative where did that originate? That looks like a big initiative that you're tying into, but can you give us a little bit more information about that?
Yeah, I'll kick it back to Sean, who I call Mordecai, so I'll call him Mordecai.
Yeah, the Hope Initiative really is a collaboration, and it's connected to our work with TRHT, and we are a part of the Hope Initiative, and there are various sites around the country where we've been tasked to take the Hope data and bring life to it, to share it across our states, across our counties, and to really spark conversations, right? And so the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Dr. Gail Christopher, and the National Health Collaborative all came together for this project, and really looking at this data. And this data is, I think, is through 2020, 2019. And so what we have been doing, we started a podcast, and we've been in every presentation, we've been sharing this data across Michigan to have these conversations around health equity and really dealing with the disparities. And so, we are a part of that, and we're moving this conversation forward with this data.
Great, thank you. We have a new question in the chat, which is, how can we read about all the elements in the BREATHE Act? Are there web resources to learn more?
I'm sorry, I'm muted. So you can start with the federal, which is really our guide. And so what we did with the federal BREATHE Act, and that's the breatheact.org.
Mm-hmm.
And we are in the process of building out Michigan breathe.org. So that's coming soon. We'll share that once it's live and ready to go. But you can actually read those pages. You can go through each section by section, and it will give you a very good idea of how we're moving in Michigan, because we are following the federal guidelines. What they did for us at the state level was to actually create some templates for states and local communities to use that really focus on state level legislation that aligns with the federal legislation.
Yep, and that's
It's really good reading, Terry. I highly recommend it.
Yep, breatheact.org.
I think Lynn has a question.
First, thank you so much, Angela and Sean or Mordecai. This has been, very, very informative, and as you called it, very sobering. But I am thinking about the fact that we all in this room need to really take action. And one way that we can do it that would not be very difficult is to think, I'm thinking about all of the people who I want to invite to listen to this recording, and to ask them to listen, and that I would say, I would love to talk with you about this, because we need to multiply this exponentially, right? As Angela and Sean are saying, the word needs to get out. And Sean and Angela, is that okay with you? GLUNA puts the recordings onto our website, which we'll keep there for a while. And I know that Bob, as president, will put it into, the link into one of our e-blasts. But so many of us belong to other organizations, and I just think about how the word could be spread. Does that work for you, or would you like, if it's an organization, would you like to be invited to speak again, or would you like this to be shown? Because this has been so clear, and it's just so important. I want to make sure a lot of people hear this. Thank you.
I think it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, I think absolutely share it. And when you when we do the call to action, so we actually have an action center that is specific to the Michigan Breathe Act. So you'll have a chance to sign on, and you can do that as an individual. But you mentioned that many of you sit inside of organizations. You can actually sign on as an organizational co-sponsor. We are really looking to expand that kind of organizational co-sponsorship, especially where there's areas of expertise and advocacy already happening. And so that was one of the ways that we kind of reached out to folks is these are the people who know, like, I'm never going to know as much about helping survivors heal as the Firecracker Foundation. And so we want to make sure that in this new world that we're imagining and these resources, that folks like Tajmika actually have the resources to build the systems of care that they have always dreamed of. So yes, absolutely. Please share it, with folks close to you in your networks. Please sign on as individuals, and please sign on as organizations, and help us advocate and get more folks. That's very generous. Thank you.
And that sign on is at the tinyurl.com/breathemi.
It is.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
And for those of you in the Lansing area, we're working on a Lansing Breathe Act.
Excellent. Are there other questions? Anybody want to either type it in or just raise your hand on your Zoom and we can have a conversation or comments?
I have a question. Can I ask a question?
Of course.
So having heard the story behind the data a bit and looking at the data and kind of how these systems collide in ways that produce harm that some would say is not intended, I believe it's really intentional. So from the two goals that you're focusing on and the celebration of peace right now, how does this, how do we have a different kind of conversation that brings us into different kind of relationship across community? Those are our global goals. So as Mordecai reminds me, and as One Love Global, the name of our organization reminds us that we act locally, but we think globally. So how do you have these conversations with folks in your networks? And is this something that is being talked about? How is Roe v. Wade being talked about in kind of peace spaces and in UN spaces because of the impact on some of our most directly impacted and marginalized folks?
That is an excellent question. I'm going to see if there's anybody with more expertise than me that can provide some insight and answers to that. Anybody have thoughts?
I think it is pretty much driven by people who are informed and who care about marginalized communities and liberties and the right to choice for everyone. Those who are influenced primarily by religion or whatever upbringings that they have had, I have felt that they continue to carry on their views. So it's going to take a lot of education and informing people to bring about the change, and to extend it to the marginalized communities. It's going to take even more effort so that we can be of help to humanity at large.
This is Terry. I guess I'm reminded of Jeff Sachs's comment and talking about the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Even though number 16, I think, is the one that specifically says peace. He says really peace isn't achieved until all 17 of the goals have been achieved. And so as we look at those 17, it's just really a way of breaking out how we're in relationship with each other and with the natural world, whether it's the water, the gender issues, the gross inequality, the hunger, locally and globally, as Angela has so often observed and shared with us. So it's trying to show people the connections between all these things. And it's really hard to get your hands around all 17 goals at the same time for any of us. So I think we tend to cluster around a few at a time. I know I end up dancing around most of them at some point or another. But I think I think you've got the key, that the key is really relationships with each other, and how do we build long lasting relationships. And these are struggles that the human family's faced for a long time. They're getting more challenging as we get a little more crowded, and we put the earth systems in higher stress, which is creating all kinds of issues of migration and hunger and militarism. And okay, I'm getting depressed now. I think I'll stop.
I think I would add to that through these programs, we do try to bring and educate people to these kind of issues. When legislation of this sort is at a point where advocating to legislators would be effective, we certainly can help promote that through our e-blasts and our other partner members, and try to get legislators to take the action. So I think those are ways that GLUNA can be of help and be a partner in helping to push this forward.
So we have a request for you to please tell us more about TRHT and One Love Global, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, I'll take the TRHT and pass it back to Angela. But One Love Global, we have had the privilege and the honor of convening the TRHT work, and it was 5 years ago we started this journey. And TRHT stands for the Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation. It's a process that we engage the community in racial healing and equity, right? And so the T is truth telling, and that's narrative change. The R is what Terry talked about, is how we build it's building relationships through the process of circle keeping and healing circles. And then we have our H and our T, which really has to do with how we transform systems, right? And so looking at education and looking at economy, looking at poverty and where we still have colonization in our neighborhoods. And so really looking at the entire system, it was really a question of, if you could get rid of racism and rebuild what communities need, what would that look like? What would that process look like? Where would you start, right, in each one of these domains? And so we have been gathering the community for 5 years and continuing in and around this process. And it has become so integral to the work that One Love Global has done and was doing before TRHT, and that we are continuing to do. Matter of fact, we're planning November 18th to have our 5th year TRHT celebration at the Lansing Center. And so for everyone who's been a part of TRHT, you're absolutely welcome. And so again, it's about how we build power directly by impacted communities, and how we organize. And so that's what we have been working. That's one of the lanes that we've been moving in, and we've seen great, we've seen a lot of great things that have happened. During the pandemic, we had to go virtual. And so for the first time, we held virtual healing circles with parents and teachers and nurses, and just getting people to have those relationships and begin to build together. And again, what are the narratives? How do we sit and listen to others' story, the truth telling, right? And so it's been very, very impactful. And now we're moving that to another 5-year vision, year 6 through 10. And so again, truth, racial healing, and transformation. And One Love Global is continuing to hold that process and challenge systems leaders in transforming systems. And so one of the priorities that was set by TRHT was education, because it impacts, families and youth. And One Love Global's work, youth are centered in our work. And so I'll pass it over to Angela, the founder of One Love Global, right? So, but yeah, that's a little bit about TRHT, and you can go to our website, oneloveglobal.org, I think /TRHT, to read about the different pillars in how we approach systems transformation through the TRHT process.
Thank you, Mordecai. Yeah, I think the connection here is policy. Ultimately, we want to replace bad policy that creates harm and replace that with good policy. And that's really been part of our vision from the very beginning. One Love Global was founded in Detroit in 2004, and we literally spent the first 4 to 5 years just looking at data. Very much the way that we started this conversation tonight is how One Love Global was born. And I'll just give a nod to the UN, because at the time it was the Millennium Goals, and that actually shaped us having a global perspective. We looked at data on segregation. What was it about communities that produce such dismal outcomes? And not everywhere. So we looked at the data on places that had the highest populations of Black children, that had the highest rates of poverty, and just examine what those had in common. High rates of segregation, low rates of investment. Defunding had already happened of schools and neighborhoods in those places. And we began to realize that at the time in Detroit, that Detroit actually had more in common with developing countries than it actually did with its neighboring suburbs. And we started to look at what's underneath it? What are the root causes? And it became really clear that as much as we could work on ourselves and work on our neighborhoods, and we could do all the things that people tell us we should do to take responsibility, that actually hides, that actually allows really intentionally bad actors to hide behind policy and to continue to weaponize law to maintain racial hierarchy. And we didn't know how we were going to do it, but we knew that it was important, that it was going to take us working at the individual and family level, that it was going to take us building different kinds of organizations and being in community and collaboration with organizations that were focused on racial equity, and that we would actually have to come together to build the kind of power that it takes to transform policy and to dismantle structural racism. And I'm using language now some of which didn't exist in 2004 in the way that we understand it today. But those actions, when I go back and look at our 501c3 application and the things that we said that we were going to do and focus on, they're still absolutely necessary. And so over the past year with our expanded family, we reimagined our vision. We really took a look and said, how far have we come? What have our wins been? Where do we still have so much work to do? And recasting that vision so that, look, how do we actually move towards a vision of global liberation and reparations, where Black people experience radical love of self, community, and planet? And so peace has always been a part of our mission, but we really expanded our vision to understand that this land that we caretake, that had other folks here long before us, and prayerfully, if we make the kind of transformations that are needed now, future generations will enjoy. And so we had to really think differently about how we were in relationship with one another, the folks around us, and really examining how, like, correlations between lead in the water and violence in communities, because those are the kind of correlations that scientists know about, our government knows about, but somehow at the community level, we're still told that we're the root cause of violence and that the solution is getting tough on crime. So how do we shift the narrative? And that's the really important part about TRHT and why One Love Global is really here having this conversation, and why we're open to having many more is because it's through the relationships, the sharing of stories, the listening to one another, that we begin to see ourselves in one another, that we begin to have a different understanding of people whose lives and experiences are very different than our own. And I remember Dr. Christopher said at the launch of TRHT, wouldn't it be a shame if we just preached to the choir? The folks, I mean, since TRHT started in a world that didn't exist. It was before the 2016 election. Like, we started a process and have faced a different reality, and the world has continued to change. And some would say it's more divided. I say it's more clear. The doing away of civility and political correctness, folks are really explicit. You know, we started off talking about implicit bias and how we have conversations. Those of you who've been involved in TRHT this entire time, you know, we talked about how do we, you know, engage in conversations with folks that you may have relationship with who would never listen to me. You know, some of it's in our own families and, you know, our churches and our schools. And there was that opening where we thought that, you know, we could have a different kind of conversation. And now we're at a point of how do we reduce the harm? Like, we're at a protecting mode. How do we just keep it from getting worse? How do we wrap our arms around the people who are being trafficked across our country for, you know, politics? So for me, I'm clear. Like, I love knowing who is fighting for right. Like, it has never been more clear in my lifetime, right and wrong, friend, foe, ally, and I hate to use the word enemy because I don't have any enemies, but there are people who certainly perceive me as an enemy and a threat. But I just think that it makes the community of folks of goodwill who really desire for peace, it draws us closer together. It's why you invited us here tonight. And we just need more and more of this. Like, we've sustained TRHT for 5 years because we chose to. And we decided that we're going to move forward and continue to expand TRHT because we have relationships all over Michigan. We have relationships all over the country. And many of us have relationships around the world. And, you know, Dr. Christopher had the foresight to work with Representative Barbara Lee in California to introduce a Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Commission bill. It needs our energy. That bill is a part of our Michigan Breathe Act. We took the TRHT part. It actually is aligned with the federal Breathe Act work, and we are making it a cornerstone of our Michigan Breathe Act and our Lansing Breathe Act. It's going to take work to get there. And by commission, we mean people like us. We don't mean folks sitting at the tops of institutions who we work with all the time and who are the hardest folks to move. It takes us to move folks inside of those institutions. So we start here at the grassroots with people who care about people, just as you said. Tazan, you're absolutely right. We build the coalition of the willing, and that's how movements begin.
And it's a really amazing example of always think globally, work locally, right? Everything you're doing. Keep your eyes on the big prize. You got to get the work done at the local level and in pieces that are digestible. So
And bringing our youth into this front and center, as Mordecai said, like that's really the heart and soul of One Love Global is the children. Because like our indigenous family, we're looking at 7 generations. You know, what are we building today that maybe we don't benefit from, but that we're laying the groundwork for future generations. And that's a different way of working. It requires a degree of sacrifice. It takes yourself out of the center. And it means that we invest in our young people in a different way, and we see them in a different way as co-leaders, as co-stewards of this planet, as the inheritors of the earth, not the future leader, but they're leaders right now. So it is in our best interest, because you got to believe that the forces of evil are also recruiting and educating children and mentoring children to be different kinds of people who will shape a different kind of world. And we saw that even in our own community, where children were in middle school building walls with their bodies to keep other children from passing down the hallway. They're attuned and they have access to information that we didn't have growing up. We didn't have the world at our fingertips with a device, whether that information is fact or fiction, whether it is truth or disinformation. The way that we ensure that more and more of our young people are not being indoctrinated into systems of white supremacy is by inviting them into the healing space and building different kinds of relationship and supporting their leadership in this work. So that's what One Love Global does. That's really our entire purpose for existence.
well, thank you for your work. We really appreciate you spending time with us and sharing with us everything that you're doing. Does anyone have any other topics or questions before we close? Or comments? Well, I'll just say thank you so much. I mean, I feel like this is just the beginning of a conversation, not the end of it. And you're going in so many directions, and they're all very impressive and so worthwhile. We'll share the Breathe Michigan information on the site. If there's other information that we can share, we'll do that too. That would be really great. And we'll have the video for this there as well, so that everyone can share it with anybody who wasn't able to be with us tonight. And I guess thought Dawson was raising his hand. He's clapping. So yes, we can do that. Everyone can take their mute off for a second and we can thank our speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for everything. Thank you for the
Thank
hard
you.
work that you're doing.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm just going to share, this is part of Peace Quest, this presentation, and I just want to have one little shout out for Peace Quest. There are still more events coming this month, and as you can see, it's well worth attending them. And there's the website for that. And then I'm going to actually turn things over to Bob with one more sincere thank you to both Sean and Angela for all your time, for all your effort, for all your energy, and for the work that you're doing. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. And I'm going to turn it over to Bob, who is our president of GLUNA.
Thank you, Lisa. And yeah, Sean and Angela, this was really a wonderful presentation. It really can't help but appreciate the passion that you have for your work and the importance of what you're doing and your depth of knowledge and depth of caring. So we're glad that we could have you, and we look forward to sharing this video recording through our website and getting it in front of more people about what is going on. And as things move forward, that we can advocate for the Breathe Act here in Michigan. I do want to just add that the Greater Lansing United Nations Association on nearly a monthly basis has these types of Java Cafe programs. And so we invite you to be a member of GLUNA. Your being a member is one way of showing that you support peace and that you support the work of the United Nations. It's a real statement that you do that. It's also, by being a member, we want to be sure that you are aware of the programs that we have and keep you involved. And we really want to involve you also in our advocacy work. So I hope you will consider joining GLUNA. You can go to gluna.org and become a member. Thank you so much for being here this evening. Thank you again, Sean and Angela, and I wish everyone a good night.
Good night. Tassin, can you remove that slide so we could see everyone, please? Where is it? Okay. There. Thank you so much, Angela and Sean. This